Oh, welcome. Um, yeah, this will be the talks about theater and games, and we will start with three talks, and after that a panel. We will start with Annette Mays from Coney, and then David. You? Oh, what's your name?
Minkat.
Minkat from Coney too. There she is. After that, David Fono from Atmosphere Industries and ZTO, and after that, Lucas Mattei from Mattei and Consorten. So this line of talks will be about this sexy interspace between theater and play, and about the kind of interesting things you find when you think about playing with audiences. Annette Mays will start with talking about a new project. It's called, I always forget it, Better Days of a Nation.
Early Days of a Better Nation.
Early Days of a Better Nation. She's working with Coney in, I think, London now. And she's co-director of Coney. And what are you doing? Maybe you can just tell us.
In life?
Yeah.
I'm basically one of the three directors, artistic directors at Coney, who I'll tell you more about during my presentation.
Okay. Do you want to say something?
I am a game maker and theatrical experience maker called Minkat, and I quite often work with Coney on things.
So, let's start. Do you need this?
I don't know, do I need that?
Oh, I think for the Internet Forever thing.
Hello. So, do you mind if we close the curtains, just because it's quite fun to see children sort of go back and forth in the back, but it's slightly distracting as well. Hello, come on in. Thank you. I'm Annette, this is Mink. We have just run a slightly epic game, so might be a little bit hazy to start with. I'm one of the three artistic directors of Coney. We make sort of immersive theatre work in which the audience takes a leading role. So this is A Small Town Anywhere, a show of us in which the audience were the inhabitants of a small town that came under pressure based on an old French film. We work in theatre, but also a lot with digital technology. So this is part of A Cat Escapes, which is a show for young people, which takes place in schools. There's a cat that you need to help escape, as pictured there, who's in touch via Skype. She can type. They get weekly updates from her, and it plays out like that. But for us, technology is very much platforms to distribute story with, rather than that we are particularly technology driven. We just use it a lot because it expands the story spaces we can work with, and we can reach people where they are and at different times in their lives. I think we're really excited about all the new cultural spaces that are emerging around technology, and it's sort of changing how we tell stories and how theatre is made. So this is the National Theatre in London, for which we did a piece, but it wasn't in any theatre. It took place around the theatre, in the foyers, the lobbies, and one of the leading characters is Rabbit, who is there on the giant LCD screen telling you to turn on your radio to a particular frequency. So the work sort of sits between a lot of different genres. The audience is really active, so we look a lot at games. We use games to develop our work. It's theatre in some ways. It also works it's also programmed in art galleries. We've worked with broadcasters. So although we always make the same thing, we tell stories in which the audience is the hero. They are taken on an adventure, and we create the framework in which they move through. We do it in very different media, using very different media, which makes it hard for the rest of the world to pinpoint what we do, which is quite interesting. I'm sure other people who will talk later will have the same experience. So we sort of come very much from an art theatre background. So our work always starts sort of with questions, big questions. And I have to hold the microphone like this. I'm really bad at microphones, so bear with me. Questions and interests that we have out inside the world. So we never start with technology, we never start with game structures. We always look at the questions that we want to explore with our audiences. I think for me this kind of work is really good to look at social systems with, because games, interactivity, they are systems. So using those system-like structures to look at the systems that we live within are most interested to us. So we look a lot at, a lot of plays, shows, things, adventures, whatever you want to call them, are often about how we live together. I always talk about my theme as you, me, us, and them. It's how we relate to each other, how do we relate to the world, and what are the systems we live in, and how do we relate to those. So that's a little bit of an overview of the work that we do in general. And we're particularly here to talk about Early Days of a Better Nation, which is a new piece, which we've been working on with. So we make a new team for every project. So this team, I sort of function as the director. We've worked with a writer called Jason Sutton up till now, and a game designer. We often work with game designers in the making of the work, and that's Mink in this point, who we've worked with a lot. So I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thank you. I make work under the name Minkette, and I even got that name from making things and playing the games made by Coney way back. So the theatrical, the rabbit taking over the spaces of a theatre was my introduction to the world of games that happen outside of a computer or outside of a board. And I really like the Coney's work because it is about the questions and how you as an audience member is not just watching but doing. And so a lot of my practice, I do focus more on the game side of things. I don't make so much theatre, but I do try and add a sense of theatre and a sense of self into all of the games that I create. So I think I'm the kind of inspired by Coney and part of Coney in that I take the other half of what Coney do.
Okay. Yeah. I think that's just to lead on from that. I think for us it's really important. We work really collaboratively. So when I say I'm the director, Jason was a writer, and Mink is a game designer, I fed into game design, Mink is fed into the writing, everyone feeds into the directing. We work very collaboratively, but make sure we have the expertise as we need in the room, but then everyone works very collaboratively, which I think, for me, this kind of work needs to be made quite holistically. I don't believe in putting story on a game structure or a game structure onto story. They need to grow up together. So I think that's really important, and it's really important that Mink as a game designer is someone who thinks a lot in story for our work. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about Early Days of a Better Nation, which is the piece we're developing and the game we've just played is part of. So Early Days of a Better Nation basically started with this. There's a lot has happened in this sort of last year and a half. It's been incredibly exciting to see a lot of grassroots organising in politics, a lot of big revolutions, a lot of fringe groups coming together and instigating big movements. Whether or not everything's been successful is in a way was secondary to us. I think there's just so much going on. It felt really exciting and really inspirational. From my point of view, whether or not they individually succeed or don't succeed, and what the good and bad sides are of it, I see more as something that's happening in the world right now, and seems to be happening in a lot of different places in a lot of different ways. But there is a sort of people demanding a voice, which we found really interesting and wanted to create work about. Simultaneously, that was a conversation going between me and John, who is the artistic director of the National Theatre of Wales, for people not in GB geography, Wales is a country, but not really. They have their own parliament now, which happened. God, how many years ago?
Welsh, I don't know.
Welsh, about 10 years ago, they got their own parliament with their own, which devolved a lot of power to Wales locally. So they're really interested in what it now means, what it means to be a nation but not a nation, what it means to break loose from one nation but still be related to it. So we started talking about nationhood, this sort of movement, and we decided we wanted to create a show in which the audience, this is how far we are to a certain extent, the audience created their nation. The audience, in some way, shape or form, started to decide how they wanted to live together if they could start from scratch. So the title, Early Days of a Better Nation, is part of, it's a long story actually, I won't go into that. The full sentence, though, that it refers to is work like you're part of the early days of a better nation, which is, so that's where the title came from. So when we make something, we start with the questions and these sort of inspiration sources. We then start and do something like this first. Really shitty thoughts in lots of notebooks. Then we sort of start working out what kind of structures there might be initially that are reasonably overseeable. And then this is us working out with Smarties. If we did something with an audience of 120 and some cameras and some microphones and some actors, how would that work? And this is how it starts, really. So from this, we made what we call a scratch performance, which is an English term basically for a sort of test performance. So I'll just show you a little bit what happened, and then Min can talk a little bit more about the design, the sort of underlying game design of that. So the revolution was over. People joined, were part of a party, part of the interim government, and they had to create their new nation. So this is one of the players, obviously part of the Green Party. One of the things they did was to create their own constitution. There was a spending crisis. The leader got shot at one point. This is we worked with big video projections, so this is a sequence where we cut together a lot of assassinations. I think we're looking at JFK over there, just after the leader gets shot. So it was quite theatrical and less game-like than the thing we've done today. They had a crisis. They needed to build elections. They needed to make spending cuts. So there was a lot for them going on. We had, like today, a sort of bean economy. This is someone explaining about some fraud that has gone on. This was in Cardiff. And we worked with a live media. So there were 2 cameras and 2 roaming reporters who both reported on everything that was going on, which then went to a really big screen, but also stirred up, focused on different people, stirred up, very much like the media does, create media profiles for people. So there were lots of ingredients, and we did that twice for about an audience of 120 and about 80 people in London and Cardiff. And this for us was sort of, after the pure paper, the first step towards the show. So the show we're creating will probably see the light of day somewhere late spring, early summer next year. So Min will tell you a little bit about how she and us thought about the game design of this bit, and then we'll go on to the stage that we're in now.
So I think, starting with the big questions, the main question was, we want to get 100 to 120 people in a room. We wanted to have enough people to make it feel like you're actually in a nation. How do you actually get 120 people to all make choices together? How do you get them to decide things? And that's not just a problem within the game itself, but also as nations form. How do we decide? We have our political systems, which feel incredibly broken. And And if you're starting a new nation, how are you going to start your own political system? How do you allow all these voices to make decisions as to how your one nation behaves? And so I think that was the start point from where we wanted to explore, and we took that as our main challenge, our main problem. So in this first game, the first iteration was very different from the game that we played today. The actual structure of it, the parties we decided beforehand, and we had hustings. It was based on the game Gnomic, so all of the laws of the land. So if you don't know the game Gnomic or Gnomic games, you write the rules of the game as you play. And so you try and write rules that help you personally win. So the only rules are don't break the rules, essentially. So we try to, if you're creating a new a new nation from scratch, writing the constitutions, writing the laws of your land, which seemed like a logical place to start. And but we realised that 100 voices are making 100 rules. How would you organise and filter this, and how would you sort through this? And so then we had the media present, we had politicians, and we had people standing up and making claims and trying to rally other people. And both in this game and the game that we played today, there was an economy of beans. So we had a unit, a token that we could actually count how many people, how popular was this person, how popular was this idea, and that's how we ended up deciding things. The really interesting thing that came out of this was that the rigid structures we put in place to be able to count and tell who won the game, every single time we played it, the players rebelled against such rigid systems in a different way. Oh, is that in your next bit? Sorry. Each time they tried to break the game because of the shape of the system, which is what I then changed drastically in the second iteration. But I'll hand over to Annette now.
So as Ming said, so we did it twice. The first time was a lot more chaotic than the second time, obviously, because the second time we understood better what we were doing. But what was most exciting in both were the rebellions. There were, in the first, this is at BAC, the first time we played it, where basically a big group decided to create a sit-in. We love it, by the way. We love it when people actually find ways to play. We're not, in that sense, our show, our work, even the games that we play are not games with really set rules. We quite like using rules to create spaces in which things can happen. So we actually like it when things happen. But what was really exciting about these rebellions is they were always against the system. So the first time they rebelled against a certain rule around voting. And the second time they rebelled against the existence of beans, which is basically the economy. Which is really, really, really exciting. So, sort of having done those two scratches, we decided that the next step we would make a game, which is the game we brought here. And as Ming was saying, sort of the biggest thing that we wanted to look at is how do people self-organize? If we give them some rules, we give them some things to achieve together, but we don't tell them how. We don't tell them. We build up so that you have to collaborate, but you could sort of maybe sidestep that a little bit and play purely for yourself. But then, if everyone does that, the country goes to ruin. So that was sort of the starting point of the design of This Land Is Your Land. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you do it?
Yeah. So for the design of the game that we played today, there's also been about 3 different versions of that game. So after we decided that people were rebelling against the structure, so what structures did they actually want to build themselves? So I then set about trying to design a power vacuum, giving people problems they needed to solve. and then also ways of solving it, but not necessarily who should solve it. So this is what I attempted to do, and it's taken about three or four iterations to get to the point of the game that we played today. So I drew on some other games that I already really like and really know really well, the mechanisms, so I know that those work well. So I based the there are provinces within the game. Also, because this is a pervasive game festival, it's a street game festival, I wanted to actually make the game more about the space, because we used up a lot of space in these games, but in the previous version, the space itself wasn't crucial or important. So because this is about being in the physical world, I wanted to create a game that was, the physical presence was actually integral to the game. And so I based it on Pandemic and Forbidden Island, which is two board games where you are on Forbidden Island, you're on an island that is slowly sinking into the water. The more things you do, the more of the island disappears beneath your feet, and you have to try and rescue 4 treasures and escape before the island entirely disappears. And so I like the idea of being in a nation that's slowly being nibbled away at, and if you don't act enough, and if you don't act fairly enough, then you are going to lose the whole country. However, I also wanted to put in the tension of working collaboratively to save the whole country and being fair, but also the personal interest, because that's a very strong feeling that I personally have about politics, is that it seems that politicians have very strong personal interest, and it doesn't feel so much, especially, well, in England definitely, doesn't feel so much that they actually care about the whole country. It's all about their personal interest. So I wanted to put in the contrast of trying to save your whole country being in everyone's interest, but actually if you save yourself a little bit more and you try and do better for yourself a little bit more, you will detriment everyone a bit, but you personally are more likely to win as an individual. So the game that we played today and the previous iterations of this game, you had to save all of the land to be able to win, but you as an individual could win by being president of the country if you managed to save the country. So it was to give you a collaborative goal and an individual goal, and then having to fight between those two things.
So basically that's where we're at now. We're the next stage of the development of this project, we're looking at collaborations with universities and creating something that integrates political science students and anthropology students and their view upon systems. So we're basically going to examine systems with them. And the stage after that, we then put together what we've learned from this game, these test theatre performances, and working with the students into the next iteration of the show, which then is starting to look like what the final show will be. I think that's all I'm going to say, and we'll just do some Q&A if people have any Qs, and hopefully we'll have some As. Do you want to do it with this? I don't know how. What
would help you to? I think we need the other questions on the.
How would such a collaboration with a university look like then? What would happen? How much should the university engage then on its own?
We're currently basically exploring that we're talking to a couple of universities about how to best do that, because I think for us what we try and do is that when we need to get certain things out of it. So for me, what I want to get out of it is, as a director, is what are the most interesting objectives and structure, and for the audience to bring into that room. What are the most interesting and the most interesting sort of structures that might echo historical or recent. So that's what I need to get out of it. Different universities have different research objectives and different learning objectives. So we're looking at different ways of doing that. So one of the things we are looking at is doing almost like a tabletop form of Boal forum theatre. If anyone, this is theatre history, 1960s. They made theatre. Boal made theatre. They would play out, for example, a political situation. with actors, and then they'd start the show again. And people could stop it at any point, take over one of the roles. So the audience could take over one of the roles and change the course of the story. So that's something that we're looking at as a table, but we'll do a tabletop rather than make it really performative, to look at different structures and different allegiances that in both historical and recent political situations have taken place. So we're looking at sort of the system and its players, not as individuals, but as streams. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think.
Cool. But yeah, and then we're looking at how that fits within the universities. Some of them want a lecture with it, and some of them don't, and some of them want the show back. And so we're just open. We're quite open in our collaborations and try and facilitate different objectives within it.
One last question.
Sorry.
You can ask questions later.
Well, it's kind of two questions. Oh, maybe you. Yeah. So I know I'm always cheating. So I just wanted to ask you. I'll ask you the one I'm more interested in first. So the challenge of kind of getting, game structures and then the theatre experience. So if I play a video game, for example, there's only so many things I can do in there because it's ultimately noughts and ones. So what are the challenges you find of actually sort of taking some of those systems but then putting it with human beings who do things like try and sell their factories in your game earlier and try and be human and don't work in noughts and ones? What are the sort of challenges of that?
We like that.
But do you ever feel like it gets out of control, and have you ever felt like it kind of lost it?
I think this is why we work in the way that I've just talked about, because I don't like shows in which I can't do what I want to do, because then it ceases to be interactive, or it ceases to be about me, and I make shows about you, so that's good. So what we need, so the show itself needs to be clever enough to regain control. But, it's about creating enough open space for people to do lots of things. And cheating is part of, our shows are not games in the sense that within a game you need to stay within the rules. In life you don't. If, you get to find different ways of achieving certain things. So it's about creating a structure that's exciting enough so that lots of situations emerge from it, and objectives that are exciting, and enough clashes so that it becomes dramatic, leaving enough open space for people to play it well, play it badly, exploit it, cheat within it, be selfish, be heroic. We've seen all that kind of behavior, and I think that's why I make this work, because I think that's really exciting. The show then itself needs to be clever enough to regain control at certain points, to shift it along, to move it along, which is, in essence, that's when you start talking about the craft of making this work, is to create a dramatic through push with simultaneously with those really open spaces. So the answer is it's really difficult.
Just to quickly add, I mean, the idea that computer games are very set and binary is not quite true. People will try and people will find little ways to get what they want out of it, mods and glitches and all these little things. But I think from a designer's point of view as well, there's last slide. Yeah. From a designer point of view, what I think a game designer should be trying to do is not think about the medium, but also to really think about what behaviours you want the player to have, and that you can make the whole kind of can a computer game make someone cry? Is that a behaviour that you'd want? Then yeah, do it. But I'd rather make people feel angry. I'd rather make people feel like they want to do something, like they want to question something. And I think that you could do that in any medium, and it's still within the game design. Sorry, hijacked that. There you go.
So thank you, Annette and Mink. Next one will